Okay, last but not least, there's still in chapter 35 the passive forms of the subjunctive to look at. There's no real difference between the indicative and the subjunctive as far as how the passive voice is formed. Nevertheless, I think it's worth our time to look at it carefully. Before we do so, however, let's turn to page 199 and look at the passive forms of the indicative as review. Let's only look at the corresponding passive forms of the indicative, or rather, the passive forms of the corresponding tenses of the indicative. That is to say, present, imperfect, and pluperfect. So the present passive indicative, you'll remember, is formed simply by changing the endings from the active endings, ost, mus, tis, und, to the passive endings, ar, ris, tur, mor, mini, untur. So on the top of 199, we'll see instead of paro, paras, parat, we see parur, pararis, paratur, paramor, paramini, parantur. Pretty easy. You're just changing the endings from the active endings to the passive endings. The same exact thing happens in the imperfect as well, as you would expect, since they're both part of the same system. That is to say, you change the active endings mst, mus, tis, und to the passive endings ar, ris, tur, mor, mini, untur. And there's the imperfect in the middle of the page. Parabar, parabaris, parabatur, parabamor, parabamini, and parabantur. Once again, very easy. Just change the active endings to the passive endings. You'll certainly remember, however, that none of the perfect tenses do anything like that to form the passive. That is, you're not changing the endings in the perfect tenses from active to passive, but rather you're using the perfect passive participle, i.e. the fourth principal part, and some form of sum. Now, I said we were only going to look at the three tenses that corresponded to the three tenses that we learned in the subjunctive so far, but I think it's smart to first glance at the regular perfect indicative passive. Perfect indicative passive, which is in the middle of the page also, paratos sum, paratos est, parati sumus, parati estis, and parati sunt. So you're just taking that fourth principal part and you're adding some form of sum. And that's I am prepared, you are prepared, he is prepared, etc. Notice that the participle, when you go to the plural, you have to make the participle plural as well as the version of essay. Okay, that was the regular perfect indicative. We're not so concerned with that now. Let's go to the pluperfect passive indicative, the pluperfect passive indicative, which is at the very bottom of this page. Now you'll remember that the perfect passive that we just looked at uses some present tense form of essay. Why? Because the past tenseness, the perfectness, the completed aspect is already built into the participle paratos. So paratos sum means I was prepared. It doesn't mean I am prepared. You might very goofily think of it as I am in the state of having been prepared. Don't translate it that way. That's just a way of thinking about why we have the present form of essay here to say I was prepared. Now, how do I say I had been prepared? You take that perfect passive participle, which has the past tenseness built into it, and you add a past tense form of esse. Eram, eras, erat. So the pluperfect passive indicative, is paratos eram, eras, erat, parati eramos, eratis, erat. There on the bottom of page 199. The translation, of course, is I had been prepared, you had been prepared, he had been prepared, etc. Had been prepared. Okay, turn back to page 134, and in the middle of the page, you'll see the morphology of the pluperfect passive subjunctive. Well, what we just looked at on page 199, in fact, maybe you want to keep your finger there, what we just looked at on page 199 was paratos plus some imperfect indicative form of sum, eram, eras, erat. Okay, now flip back to page 134, keep your finger on 199, flip back to page 134, and you'll see the morphology of the pluperfect passive subjunctive in the middle of the page. You'll see there that all that happens is the form of esse is changed to the corresponding form of the subjunctive. So in the indicative, the passive indicative, paratis eram, paratis eras, paratis erat, just simply becomes the corresponding form of the subjunctive. Paratus essem, paratus esses, paratus esset. That's it. That's it. You just take paratus eram, eras, erat, change eram, eras, erat to the corresponding form of the subjunctive, and you have paratus essem, paratus esses, paratus esset, and that is the pluperfect passive subjunctive. Now, what about translating the passive subjunctives? Well, the good news is there's nothing different. You determine the construction that's being used. You translate the subjunctive accordingly. Just be sure you use passive meaning when you see a passive form. So a jussive would be let us be loved rather than let us love. A purpose clause, they went to the races in order that they might be seen. A cum clause might be when the slaves had been led through the streets, etc. Therefore, nothing is changing. The constructions are just like what we've learned so far, only be sure you translate them passively. Now, just to be sure you understand how easy this is, let's look at just a couple of examples in the exercises at the bottom of 134, exercise 35.7. Number 1, Brutus Caesarem occidit, ne populus Romanus a tyranno regeretur. Okay, it doesn't look that bad. Actually, it looks quite easy. Right off the bat, I see ne plus the subjunctive. I know how to deal with that. I see a regular perfect tense verb leading off the sentence. So it shouldn't cause us any problems. Let's try it. Brutus Caesarem occidit. Simple, like Latin 1. Brutus killed Caesar. Ne populus Romanus a tyranno regeretur. In order that the Roman people might not be ruled by a tyrant. Actually, let me dispense with that auxiliary might here, just because it will make much better English. So let's try it. In order that the Roman people not be ruled by a tyrant. So you see, the translation is the same as it was in chapter 34. Only because we have a passive end here, tur, we're translating it as a passive. In chapter 1, it was Quintus went to Delphi in order that he might see the shrine of Apollo. Here it's Brutus killed Caesar so that the Roman people not be ruled by a tyrant. Simple. Let's just do one more to make sure we're good with it. Number 2. Cum ab Antonio opugnatus esset. Okay, good. We have a pluperfect here, pluperfect passive. Roma fugit. Cum ab Antonio opugnatus esset. Roma fugit. Okay, of course, here we have a cum clause. I said earlier, for cum clauses, meaning when. For now, it just means when. We'll add to that later, as I said. In cum clauses, translate the subjunctive like the corresponding tense of the indicative. Well, here we have pluperfect passive. How did we translate pluperfect passive before when it was indicative? As had been xed. Had been xed. So let's do the same thing here. When he had been attacked by Antony, simple. When he had been attacked by Antony, he fled Rome. So there's nothing really different here with the passive subjunctives. You're translating each clause like you had before. Purpose clauses, indirect command, cum clauses, just like we've been doing all along. Just make sure when you see a passive form, you translate it passively. Okay, that's it.